I just wanted to say hello first. How are you?
I'm okay, very under pressure to go ahead with a lot of things. Basically, I'm litigating my freedom of information requests in UK, Sweden, and US, Australia, and I'm doing this in parallel to my ordinary journalistic work. So it is very intense, as you can imagine.
So very busy few months and years, almost a full decade of very intense work for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to
What keeps
realize.
you going? What keeps you going? What drives you?
First of all, I really enjoy this kind of journalistic work. I think it is really important, and you have this unique opportunity to access information which would have been impossible to access
Yeah.
unless you had these people with exceptional moral courage, like Chelsea Manning, like Edward Snowden, like Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks staff. Even if they are not the sources for this information, you still need a lot of courage to publish this information. And indeed, many would have just stopped or maybe would have never published this kind of information. I remember from the very beginning when I was looking at WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks was just, a marginal media organization, a very few people knew about WikiLeaks back in 2008. They hadn't published Collateral Murder or the Afghan war logs, Iraq war logs, cables. So back in 2008, what mostly impressed me about WikiLeaks, because I was already looking at the WikiLeaks work very closely, was the fact that they were able to get the Guantanamo manual, which basically the American Civil Liberty Union, the ACLU, are trying to get using freedom of information, and they were unable to get a copy of it, whereas WikiLeaks was able to get the document leaked to it. And they refused to comply with the Pentagon request to remove it from their website. For me, it was stunning. I mean,
Yeah,
you have
unheard of in 2008.
absolutely, absolutely, especially if you consider what happened to journalism after the 9/11. You had all these pressures from the US governments and from intelligence services. You have to realize, for example, that the New York Times refused to use the word torture for the tortures. They were calling them these techniques very cruel technique, very brutal techniques, like with the
Enhanced interrogation.
absolutely. So I mean, you have to
Extreme interrogation.
absolutely, and you have to realize that in this kind of landscape, for me, WikiLeaks was, fresh air. Finally, someone who doesn't comply with the Pentagon, not because I want to, not because I'm fighting the Pentagon, but rather because I think it is vital, it is extremely healthy to have someone who doesn't say yes systematically to the Pentagon or to the CIA or like the Washington Post not publishing the names of the country of the Eastern European countries which had allowed to the CIA to have black sites on their soil. So for me, it was absolutely, refreshing. So it was
Yeah.
absolutely important to have a new kind of media organization which was not willing to say yes, sir. We will stick your orders. We will remove whatever you ask to remove
Mm.
from our website, and we won't publish the cables, and we won't publish the Afghan war logs, Iraq war logs. For me, it was really, really important. So unless you have very bold sources, heroes like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, and you have also very courageous publishers, because it is not enough to have a fantastic source providing you fantastic documents like the Snowden files or the Iraq war logs and the cables. So you still need a publisher which is strong, motivated, and courageous enough to publish them, because you can have the most explosive revelations. But if you don't get a publisher willing to publish and take the hit, it's it's useless to have the most explosive.
Do you think the public's now sees WikiLeaks as what it is, a publishing organization, or do you think the public still looks at WikiLeaks and thinks it's a bit of a dodgy organization?
Well, of course, after 10 years of this media campaign against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, I can imagine that even St. Francis would would be depicted in an ambiguous light, So, I mean, this campaign worked a lot because people don't have vital information about WikiLeaks, so they don't realize that WikiLeaks is a proper media organization. They receive documents as any media organization anonymously most of the time, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, we journalists, we ordinary mainstream journalists always receive anonymous tips and documents. That's not rocket science. I mean, they were very good in introducing this protection of sources using encryption, which is the reason why I started looking at WikiLeaks very closely, because back in 2008, one of my sources had stopped talking to me because she was convinced we were under illegal interception. And of course, there is no way to know whether you are under illegal interception. But my source stopped talking to me. And for me, I took very seriously her concern. And I told myself I should find a better way to protect my sources. And since I'm a mathematician, for me, it was natural to look at cryptography. And the only organization in the world at that time, back in 2008, which were using encryption systematically for protecting their communications and sources, was WikiLeaks. Not even the New York Times, not even the Washington Post were providing systematic protection to their sources using encryption. That's why I started looking at their work, because it was unique, basically. And in fact, it took many, many years before the Washington Post and the New York Times introduced encryption to protect sources, and they did so all inspired by WikiLeaks, basically. WikiLeaks pioneer. So even if people don't have the right information about WikiLeaks, which is it is due to this media campaign against WikiLeaks for the last 10 years, I think people still realize the importance of the documents they have published.
Absolutely, yeah. I think everyone realizes the importance of the documents.
Yeah.
But still, there's some maneuver that people make in their heads that they look at Assange like a grey-haired Bond villain. Of course, there have been allegations of sexual assault against him in Sweden that have now been dropped. He's also accused of helping Trump get to power in 2016, releasing documents that showed the DNC favored Clinton over Bernie Sanders in the primaries. Yeah. And he always has that astute way of dealing with cameras and the media and the press. I'd call it astute. Other people may call it manipulative. But I wanted to hear from you that works directly with Assange. Tell me about the Assange that you met, the man's character and ethics.
Yeah. So first of all, it's really important to clarify that I have worked with Julian Assange for the last 11 years, now 10 years, because the last year he has been in prison. But I have done this kind of work for my newspaper, because many people say, oh, she worked with WikiLeaks. I work as a media partner of WikiLeaks, which means I was working on the documents for my newspaper. And the WikiLeaks was working on its own documents to publish in parallel with media partners. Most of the time they publish with the media partners. So who is Julian Assange? Julian Assange is a human being who is completely different from the public image we have, because he's a complicated human being. If you ask me, he's a complicated human being. So
In
it's
what
not an
way?
easy.
In what way? I heard you say that before. In which ways is he a complicated man?
Well, sometimes he's complicated to deal with. You know, he's first of all, he's complex. He's and when I
get a feeling that he compartmentalizes things so that when you're dealing with him, you're only dealing with a section of him, and then he deals with a separate journalist, and then the information that he gives that journalist are very limited. So there's no leak between one section of his work and another. Would that make sense?
In my experience, based on my experience, not. He's not. It's not like that. He may lack some social skills, if you ask me.
Right.
But then when I learned that doctors and specialists basically say that he has some kind of Asperger syndrome,
right?
That's something which is
that's
highly
very rarely mentioned, actually.
Yeah, but during the hearing,
I researched extensively for this interview, and I haven't seen one line about Asperger's.
Very, very, very limited press reports, but it was widely clarified during the hearing, the extradition hearing.
Right.
But if you ask me what kind of person he is, first of all, he's not the kind of unstable and cruel and weird person. He's warm in his relationship with people. He's very smart, brilliant, definitely brilliant. Some of the weird things for me are not weird at all, because I comes from mathematics and physics department. So some of those behaviors for me are very common. So I can deal with that, you know. But as a human being, he's a nice human being, and he has tried to do the right thing from the very beginning. When he was when he was trying to publish these documents, he was trying to publish in a sensible way with journalists who had expertise on the documents. So, for example, for when we published the Guantanamo documents, he involved Andy Worthington, who is basically the most prominent journalist researching Guantanamo for years and years. So, he's able to put together these complex things and to pioneer this idea of media organization, which is global, which is using encryption and cutting edge techniques and technology. So he's very smart, highly intelligent. And he, at the human level, he's also warm. He's a kind of intellectual person, kind of geek, kind of geek, and he's definitely not indifferent to people, as many say. He's not brutal as he's depicted. So he's a completely different person than the person we are told by the media, by hundreds of media, and most of the media campaign is based on, very superficial and very bad reporting, just to provide you, just to give you a measure of how bad the press has been with Julian Assange. In the last decade, no one has tried to get the documents. So it took an Italian journalist to try
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yes, but just to tell you that you have seen dozens of reporters on this case, and none of them have tried to, to go beyond this superficial and highly sensationalistic reporting,
Yeah. And
it's really
I
bad.
just find it I didn't want to move on to the FOIA for the moment because I find it astonishing that no, I don't find it astonishing that the media tries to depict Assange as this evil, corrupt character. What I find astonishing is that we still need to defend his character when in reality, it doesn't really matter. I mean, who is doing that? He could have been the worst person in the world. His work has nothing to do with the person Assange. His work speaks for itself. He's a publisher that published potentially one of the publisher that publishes most documents in the history of the journalism, and his character is completely irrelevant. I mean, I believe the work you're doing, trying to with the Freedom of Information Act, is not a work that tries to protect Assange. It's a work that tries to protect journalists in general, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the reasons that one of the things that basically drives me in this freedom of information litigation in 4 jurisdictions in US, UK, Sweden, and Australia is what happens when we have a journalist who has against him, a journalist and a media organization. Is not just Julian Assange, he's the lightning rod, of course, but it's not just Julian Assange, it's the whole WikiLeaks team. What happens when you have a media organization which has the entire force of the state against itself, and the state cannot kill them directly, so they have to use these techniques. So I want to go deep and trying to discover these techniques, precisely what happened in this kind of a situation, because we know that if you have these journalists, aggressive journalists, who expose the highest levels of power in dictatorship, we know what happens. They get killed, or they get put in prison for life. And so, but in this case, they cannot kill Julian Assange. And from the very beginning, no, I never thought they would kill him. That was one of the things clear to me. So what kind of techniques the state use against you when the state cannot kill you? And I want some facts, that's why I'm fighting to get the documents, because I want factual evidence. I don't want just rumors or conjectures and so on.
Explain to us exactly what is your case through the Freedom of Information Act in the UK. What are you trying? What exactly are you trying to find out, and what have you found out so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, you have to realize that the Julian Assange case goes ahead since 2010, which means 10 years. And I have spent the last 5 years trying to get access to the documents. So 5 years is a huge amount, of time. And you have to realize that in just 3 years, the Washington Post was able to get the Afghan papers, which were documents about the highest echelons of the Pentagon commenting and analyzing the war in Afghanistan. So absolutely sensitive documents. And they got just them in 3 years. In 5 years, I have been unable to get access to the documentation on the Julian Assange case, apart from some few hundreds of documents. And so this gives you a measure of how secretive is this case. So everything started back in 2015, when Julian Assange had spent 5 years under arbitrary detention. He was inside the embassy, where he took refuge in the embassy, basically the 19th of June 2012. So in 2015, I was asking questions to colleagues covering the case, and I was asking, look, do you know whether he He had been charged in Sweden. Do you know whether they have charges? Do you know whether they have just allegations? Do you know what it means that he's under investigation in Sweden for minor rape? And these colleagues were providing me very, contradictory information. So you have to realize I am a mathematician, so everything has to be rigorous, clear for me. So I got mad when I realized that it was such a mess and no one knew facts precisely. No one knew how justice works in Sweden, what it means to be under investigation for minor rape, what is minor rape compared to rape. So I realized that no one knew the facts as a journalist. And this, for me, it was incredible, because I believe that we journalists are supposed to look for facts. And that's crucial, because you cannot report, you cannot work on a case unless you have facts and you know them very rigorously and very, very rigorously. And so I told myself, I think I need to try to understand the facts, and I need to understand the case, getting factual documentation, factual evidence. And an Italian prosecutor told me, do you understand, do you know why they haven't, why he's in the embassy, why there is this judicial and diplomatic quagmire? And I said, basically, because the Swedish prosecutors refused to go to London to question him and to decide whether to charge him or whether to drop the case. And so the prosecutor, a very good Italian prosecutor, told me, this is highly unusual because they could use judicial cooperation between states. So you should discover why they don't want to use judicial cooperation between Sweden and the United Kingdom, because that's the key. And so I decided to file a Freedom of Information request in Sweden. And I was lucky because Sweden is a very open jurisdiction when it comes to Freedom of Information requests. So Sweden released me the most crucial documents about this case. Probably they didn't even realize that they were releasing me crucial documents. Yes, probably they said, well, maybe she's an Italian journalist, who cares about Italian journalists? I don't know. However, they released me crucial documents.
There's one document that clashes with what the British redacted, isn't there?
That document basically is why the Swedish prosecutor didn't go to London to question Julian Assange, which is the key of the whole judicial quagmire and legal and diplomatic quagmire.
When did you get hold of this document in particular?
In August 2015.
Right.
So that was the first.
So whilst Julian was in the Ecuador's embassy, we already knew that the UK was interfering or being a bit slow with making it easier for him to deal with this Swedish case.
Well, we knew. Well, of course we were aware that the UK was meddling in this case, because if you remember, when he took refuge in the embassy, there was a kind of massive Scotland Yard deployment around the embassy, all these police from Scotland Yard, and it was very, very intimidating for the Ecuadorian diplomats, and they were, to an extent that they were concerned that the UK authorities were ready to get inside the embassy, which is something unheard of even in times of war, Yeah. So we could imagine, of course, this role of the UK authorities, but we had no evidence of actual meddling by the UK authorities. We had no evidence of actual actions apart from these police around the embassy, and we had no evidence of actual interference in the judicial case. So
until Stefania
until
Maurizi.
until the
Fantastic.
Swedish authorities released me these documents, which were amazing. When I read them, it was amazing for me because we had the emails from the UK Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish prosecution authorities, where the UK authorities were telling to the Swedish prosecutors, don't come here to question him only after extraditing him to Sweden. And they were telling, don't think this is being dealt with as an extradition like any other. And we had all these exchange between them with name and surnames. And so for the first time, we had evidence, factual evidence of this interference by the UK on the Swedish prosecutors. And at that point, I used the Swedish documents as a kind of picklock to get the documents from the Crown Prosecution Service, which is the UK authorities basically cooperating with the Swedish authorities to get Julian Assange extradited to Sweden. So I filed my Freedom of Information request to the UK Crown Prosecution Service back in 2015, and they refused to provide any document. So I enrolled 2 lawyers, and one of these is one is Jennifer Robinson, who is also representing Julian Assange, and I needed her because she has a very deep understanding of the Assange case, and I needed a very good FOIA specialist, Estelle Dehon. So I sued them, and they started releasing documents. So I got evidence, new evidence, fresh evidence from the British side of their interference with the Swedish prosecutors. For example, back in 2013, the Swedish prosecutors were already considering to drop the case. And they wrote to the UK authorities telling they were considering to drop the case. And they said, the UK authorities replied, don't you dare get cold feet.
Say it again.
Don't you dare get cold feet. So don't do it. Don't dare. Don't you dare do it to drop the investigation. So at that point, you ask yourself, look, this was a sex case in Sweden. What kind of interest they had, the UK authorities had in this case? And they were telling the Swedish prosecutor, don't close the investigation. That was very weird. And it was at that point that I wanted access to the full documentation. And the UK authority said, we gave you all the correspondence we had with the Swedish prosecutors. I went through the files and I discovered that that was not true. It was not true that they have released me the full correspondence with the Swedish authorities. And I discovered when I discovered this, that it was not true. And then I will tell you how I discovered this, that they were lying me. Please. They were not telling me. When I discovered that they hadn't provided me the full documentation, the full correspondence with the Swedish prosecutors, I wrote them, my lawyers and I wrote them, and we said, look, this is not the full correspondence. At that point, they said, oh, we destroyed it. We destroyed the correspondence. And we asked...
So how did that conversation take place? Was that exchange of emails between you and them?
Well, basically, my lawyers officially writing to the UK Crown Prosecution Service, because the Crown Prosecution Service was the agency in charge of extraditing Julian Assange to Sweden on Swedish behalf. So it was a crucial entity involved in this case. So my lawyers were asking officially to the UK Crown Prosecution Service why we don't have the full correspondence, as you said. And they said, the UK Crown Prosecution Service officially replied, we destroyed them. And we said, what you have destroyed? We don't know. So it was incredible to us that they had destroyed crucial documentation about a criminal investigation which was still ongoing, highly controversial, high profile, and they didn't even know what they had destroyed. It's highly suspicious because I never heard that you destroyed the crucial documentation about a criminal case as it is still ongoing. So, we discovered this destruction of emails, and at that point it was highly suspicious.
Was that the set of emails that were allegedly destroyed because
Absolutely.
a lawyer had retired?
Yeah. Basically, that lawyer, he is Mr. Paul Close, who was assigned to the Assange case from the very beginning, since 2010, as soon as the Swedish case was public. And he knew everything from the very beginning. And basically, the Crown Prosecution Service destroyed crucial emails from Mr. Paul Close to the Swedish prosecutors about the case, even if the case was still ongoing, which is highly suspicious. And the incredible thing is that they claim they don't know what they destroyed. So how can you believe that the UK authorities destroyed the documents of a criminal case which is still ongoing and they don't have idea what they contain? I can't believe it, really. And I discovered this with my lawyer back in 2017, after 2 years of litigation before the tribunal in London. And now, after 3 years since we discovered this, we are still trying to have information on what kind of documents they destroyed, how many, who ordered to destroy them, and things like that. They haven't provided any explanation, which once again is highly suspicious, because at least...
Do every lawyer that retires has their emails destroyed? Does the CPS got an issue with data retention policy?
Exactly. We never heard anything like that. And this lawyer was also assigned to parliamentary inquiry on the so-called Gosport inquiry. So they had many reasons not to destroy his records, because there is an ongoing parliamentary inquiry on different matters. So it's completely suspicious, and we are still fighting. After 3 years, we discovered this destruction with my lawyers. We are still fighting to get information on what kind of documents they destroyed, why, when exactly, who ordered the destruction, and what those documents contained. Because
but
we
apparently, you not being a British citizen hinders you from accessing that sort of information, no? Is that not the most recent excuse?
You mean, that's not about the Julian Assange freedom of information litigation, but it is about the litigation on 3 former and current WikiLeaks journalists, Sarah Harrison.
Parallel litigation.
Yes, because I have 2 litigations, basically. One is about Julian Assange. Another one is about 3 journalists, Sarah Harrison, Christine Ravson, Joseph Farrell. And why those 3 journalists? Because back in 2015, they discovered that the US government had secretly acquired their documents, their data from Google. And Google had provided in a completely secret way this data, their emails and credit cards, records, and whatever, to the US government in full secrecy. And so it's very worth to look at these three journalists. And the interesting thing is that during my litigation, not even the UK authorities tried to deny that Julian Assange is a journalist, WikiLeaks is a media organization. These three people are WikiLeaks journalists. So they acknowledge their media status. So they didn't say, no, that's they are not journalists. This WikiLeaks entity is not a media organization. Quite the opposite. They acknowledge the media organization status of WikiLeaks.
I have to say, being a British citizen and hearing the treatment the UK has given Assange is mental. I mean, we live in a world now where a country, the USA, is able to request or put political pressure to one of its main partners, the UK, to keep a citizen from Australia detained for almost a decade, request an extradition to the US to indict him under the Espionage Act, a law from 1917 that was designed for criminalizing dissent in the First World War. I mean, who is safe? What journalistic work is safe if a non-American citizen can be extradited to the US to respond to answer to such ridiculous and old and dated law?
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. The treatment is completely appalling, and you have to realize that they could have, this treatment could have stopped from the very beginning had Julian Assange received solidarity from the media establishment, the UK media establishment, and they could have done that very easily. I mean, we know that the media are basically the critical conscience of our societies. So it's up to the media to, to stop the worst instincts of our governments. So if they had provided some support and solidarity, this whole saga, this whole persecution, judicial persecution, would have stopped from the very beginning. I mean, all they needed to do, the British media, was just look at the Swedish case, which has been used from the very beginning in an instrumental way, to deny him solidarity and to make you believe this is not about the US persecution, but it's rather about the sex case. So maybe he's a rapist. So, all it was needed was for the British press and the British media to look at the Swedish case, try to get the facts, try to get the documents, and they could have immediately spotted
the British media has been on or was on Assange's side for quite a few years. I mean, The Guardian has published extensively on WikiLeaks documents. When did The Guardian turn against Assange? When did the British media turn against Assange? When was Assange not useful to them anymore?
Well, I would say back in 2010, when they realized the huge pressure by the US after WikiLeaks has started publishing in cooperation with The Guardian, with Der Spiegel, with the New York Times, they had started publishing the cables, basically. That the pressure was immense, was unbelievable. And if you remember, back in 2010, immediately after they started publishing the cables, Julian Assange was treated as a person who put lives at risk. Again, there was no evidence whatsoever. And 10 years later, they cannot bring a single example of person who was killed, who was put in prison, who was tortured, whatever. They cannot bring
Tell
a
me
single.
from your experience, what were the security measures implemented by Assange by WikiLeaks when working with them? Tell me about the amount of care that went into redacting, even though people claim that WikiLeaks dumped files carelessly on the internet. I'm sure the
That's
opposite
false.
is true. So tell me
Yeah.
from your first-hand experience, how much effort was put into protecting the lives of innocents?
So first of all, you have to realize that the security procedures were completely unheard of back in 2010 when I started working on the Afghan war logs. I was really shocked about all his requests and WikiLeaks requests for handling these files securely. So I was asked to basically to use only encrypted laptop, air gap, never connected on the internet. I was asked to never use email or phones to discuss the secret documents. So each time I was supposed to meet my editors in person, wherever I was and wherever my editors were. And you can imagine how complicated this kind of logistical arrangement is for journalists. And I was told I could never discuss with them, I could never contact them via email or phones, but I was supposed to use encryption. And back in 2010, encryption was still very most unfriendly. I mean, it's still unfriendly in these days, but still we have Signal, we have Wire, we have a lot of encrypted chats. But back in those days, we had nothing. So we were supposed to use PGP. We were supposed to use certain kind of chats. And many journalists were really annoyed and irritated about these requests. And we were asked never to leave our computers unattended, which is a nightmare, you know. And I still stick to this routine, and it's very, very, very complicated.
Mm.
And I believe that, but I'm grateful to have learned these security procedures. You know, I had never been requested such procedures. Even if at that time I had, I had 9 years experience, so I was not a junior journalist. I was an experienced journalist, and none of my colleagues working on mafia or terrorism had ever worked with such strict procedures, and none of the international journalists had ever worked with these strict procedures. So they introduced the security, what is called operational security procedures in journalism for the first time. And not only this, they introduced this teamwork with media partners all around the world. And we were requested to work on redaction, which was very heavy. I remember for months I was looking at these cables, and I was removing and redacting cables, and I was passing them this information. You should redact this cable, get rid of this name. So we have done this for months and months. So it was never about dumping stuff on the internet and publishing unredacted cables, because otherwise we would have never spent, almost a year doing this tough work. From the very beginning, he could have dumped everything. He never did so, and it was never intended to do so, So again, it's propaganda, it's, superficiality and such bad reporting, it's
And
very, yep.
so such an important case, and so important for journalism as a whole, for the whole planet. As I said, the fact that a journalist in any country in the world could be extradited to the US is
Yeah.
obviously a threat to every single journalist. And it's pretty amazing that it takes an Italian journalist to chase information in the UK, and you doing this single-handedly, right? Your case, trying to get information through the Freedom of Information Act of the UK, also Australia, Sweden, and the US, is being done exclusively by Stefania Maurizi. Is that correct?
Yeah. My newspaper, I work for a major newspaper, and before I was working for one of the leading media organization in Italy, La Repubblica and L'Espresso. They publish my articles, but none of the media supported me in the sense that they provided money to pay legal works or legal work, or to pay me for this work. I'm doing this completely for free. I don't get a single euro out of this money. Of course, I publish the revelations, that's important, but I'm doing completely in my personal capacity, And so in order to get money, it was really, really tough. I mean, my lawyers have been fantastic, I would say. Some of them work completely for free. Some of them work at very highly reduced fees, but fees are still relevant, because they have to work for years. So you cannot ask them to work completely for free in some occasions, because it's very labor intensive, And so at the beginning, I pay myself 6,000 euros, but then I could not afford to go ahead paying myself. So I asked for a grant for investigative journalism. I got 2 grants, and those 2 grants covered a lot of legal expenses, but now they are out, so I need this crowdfunding initiative.
So what is the address that you asking for? 8,000 euros, and the amount of help you've gotten in the last 24 hours has been outstanding, right?
Yeah, and it's pretty encouraging. And I plan to use this money both for the freedom of information litigation and for the criminal case in Spain, because 1 month after I discovered the destruction of emails, I was targeted inside the Ecuadorian embassy as I was meeting Julian Assange, as I was meeting with Julian Assange. And they secretly unscrewed my phones. They got access to all my devices secretly. And I want to file a criminal complaint to understand what happened. And
explain what they did to your phone. They took your
unscrewed
belongings
it.
and opened your phone.
Yep.
What, in order to access your SIM card?
I think so. They
were looking for if you're carrying anything suspicious inside the phone, something hiding.
I don't know. You have to realize that usually I have visited Julian Assange inside the embassy many, many times from the very beginning, since 2012. And it was never problematic. I mean, all you were requested to do was to bring your passport, and so that they could check your name, identity, and to give them your phones. You could switch off the phone, and you were given back your phone when you were going out. But a month after I discovered the destruction of email, I went to the embassy, and the security guards seized my backpack, and I protested. I could not understand why they wanted to seize my backpack, because usually they didn't seize my backpack.
And this is a private company, right? UC Global.
Yes.
It's
exactly.
not the British police.
Exactly. It was the Spanish company UC Global, which was supposed to provide security for the embassy and Julian Assange. So I realized that something was wrong because they got my backpack, and I immediately, as I left the embassy, I immediately sent a text message to my editor saying, "Look, they seized my backpack. I was not even allowed to bring my digital recorder inside the meeting room, so I was unable to have an interview with Julian Assange because they seized everything." But nothing happened. I experienced some disruptions in my communications, but nothing special. Then, back in October 2019, a source contacted me providing the pictures of my phones completely unscrewed secretly as I was meeting Julian Assange. All my devices copied, all my devices, they took pictures of all my devices. And I'm really concerned because I had very important information in my devices, like my USB sticks, and I had encrypted all my devices, but still don't know whether they were able to access them and to decrypt the data. So I want to discover who did it, why, and whether they were able to access my data, because I had very important information. And it was the 29 and 30 of December 2017. It's pretty difficult to find someone you can give your devices, you can trust. The 30th of December, there was no one around. So, and I had never had this experience of having my backpack and all my personal belonging seized by the security guards. So I want to understand, I want to have a criminal investigation on this. So I had to pay a lawyers, I had to file a criminal complaint in Spain. That's why I need also some money to cover the legal costs of this procedure, because my former newspaper, unfortunately, don't want to cover it, even if I was there for them.
They don't want to cover it. Oh, the legal expenses. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
not for this.
So
They
would
cover
would the 8,000 euros cover everything you need? Because I mean, this is such a high profile case. I don't understand why it's not all over the place, in every single country in the world.
I know. That's how it is. This UC Global case was, so prominent. Imagine if Putin had done something like that. They opened the phone of the Washington Post national security correspondent Ellen Nakashima, and the Washington Post did absolutely nothing. At least I'm filing a criminal complaint and I want the truth. They don't. And they have all the resources they want. They could
At what stage is your complaint in Spain?
just filed, just at the beginning. I enrolled the lawyers. I gave them the power of attorney, and I need to file my criminal complaint and see what happens. Because fortunately, this UC Global company is under investigation by the Audiencia Nacional, which is the Spanish authority in charge of very serious crimes like mafia, like terrorism, money laundering, drug smuggling. So fortunately, we have these Spanish authorities investigating this case closely, and that's why I want to have a lawyer and to have a criminal complaint, because they have the power to intercept people, to arrest people, and so on. Whereas I cannot manage this as a journalistic investigation. You need the power of the prosecutors and the judges, of course.
And it's unlikely that a random private company would have an interest in any information that journalists may be carrying for themselves, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
what is the
Look,
suspicion?
if you ask me, I don't believe that a private company, would have ever risked what they risk in order to access the phone of a journalist of the Washington Post top reporter assigned to national security. Have you ever heard of this? We know that these companies are basically, these security companies are basically in bed with secret services and so on, but still there is a legal risk which is very high because they were a Spanish company on British soil inside the diplomatic embassy. So I mean, it's really unbelievable for me to believe that they did so because they wanted to do so and they were just doing this on their own initiative. I don't believe it. And it's pretty incredible to me that the Washington Post has done basically nothing. As far as I know, they never filed a criminal complaint, even if one of their top journalists, the journalist assigned to some of the most sensitive coverage, national security, cybercrime, and so on, was spied on by this company.
When was the last time you met Assange? Did you visit him? You visited him in the embassy. Did you visited him in Belmarsh?
No, not in Belmarsh, unfortunately, due to the fact that initially he was not well. Then he was not allowed to receive many visits. So, of course, the first period of his detention was problematic. Then we had COVID, so it's impossible to visit him. So I have been unable to visit him in the embassy. He wrote me a letter from Belmarsh, and I have visited him inside the embassy many times. And the last time was basically November 2018, and it was very sad because his health was collapsing. The embassy was no longer friendly as in the past. Quite the opposite. It was a prison, even worse than a prison, I would say, because at least in prison you have certain rights. You have the right to go out for an hour outdoor, whereas he didn't have any right. He was, and it was really bad. It was very sad to discover that our concern were completely real. For example, one of our concern was whenever we brought something to eat inside the embassy, we had concern that he could have some health problem, maybe an allergy, maybe some health problem. So that he was supposed to leave the embassy and to go to the hospital, and he would have been arrested by the UK authorities. So we were very careful when bringing stuff to the embassy for eating. I was very careful to keep all this stuff with me so that I had control on it. Then when it came out, when this UC Global scandal came out, we discovered that according to two former employees, the UC Global was discussing allegedly with the US authorities how to poison Julian Assange inside the embassy and how to leave the door open in order to have someone kidnapping him in the middle of the night. UC Global security guards were having this kind of conversations with the US authorities, according to these witnesses. Of course, we don't know whether we need factual evidence of this, and that's why we are lucky that there is an ongoing investigation in Spain by this Audiencia Nacional, so they can put people under interception, they can put people under investigation, they can do all sorts. They can use their power of judicial power to get the facts about these serious things which have surfaced in the last year, basically.
What are the most recent news with regards to his health? How is he holding up?
It's going really bad because he has a lung problem from the very beginning since 2012, as I remember it. And he's inside a prison. You know, in these days, it's problematic to have proper health assistance, even if you are outside the prison, because of this COVID crisis. Imagine inside the prison, you know, it's in prison, everything is more, even more difficult. And he's at risk of getting COVID. And I was told he's freezing. And I tried to contact the UK Department of Ministry of Justice. They didn't deny that he was freezing. They said all prisoners are free to exercise and to request for extra blankets, which is an incredible reply, you know. So I'm very concerned. I'm very, very concerned. And
so has he got the extra blankets, or they just say that everyone is free to request?
That's all they said. Everyone can, all prisoners can request, nothing else. They don't reply, so they just reply in this way. So of course, I cannot access the prison, so I can only ask his partner. I can only ask the WikiLeaks staff and the UK authorities, because I cannot go there myself due to COVID. So I cannot do any independent verification of this extremely serious situation apart from contacting the UK authorities.
Right. What do you think are the chances that Donald Trump may pardon Assange?
I'm very skeptical.
Yeah.
Because he crossed the Rubicon, you know. He decided he could have just dropped the investigation on Julian Assange and Wikileaks, which was opened back in 2010 by the Obama administration. He could have just dropped the case. He didn't, and quite the opposite. He charged him using a very draconian law, as the Espionage Act. So I'm not confident at all he will be pardoned. Of course, everything is possible. I don't know the Trump sphere enough. I don't know. I'm not an political insider. And, you know, we know that Trump, in the Trump world, many things are possible, you know. But I'm a bit skeptical. I don't believe he will be pardoned, and I believe he will be on the 4th of January. I believe the verdict will not be positive. I expect a very long legal battle, and this is highly problematic because Julian's health is collapsing. You know, Julian's health is seriously compromised, and I've been very sad to witness in first person how his health was collapsing, and he has been exceptionally strong. I would have gone mad after 7 months, not after 7 years. I mean, we have experienced this lockdown, which is pretty different from what Julian Assange experienced inside the embassy, because we don't have the US out of our door waiting for us to extradite us. We are allowed to go out. We are comfortable in our houses, whereas he was in a very small room, dark room, no sunlight, no fresh air. So you can imagine what it means to stay in those conditions for 7 years. I would have been unable to resist for 7 years. I would have gone mad in 7 months. And I told this to my editors many, many times. Each time I was visiting Julian Assange, I was telling my editor, it's unbelievable, it's inhuman to treat a human being this way, you know.
Absolutely. What's the current state of newsrooms in Italy then after COVID? I mean, I know that in Brazil and in the US, people lost like 25% of jobs were lost.
Yeah, even in Italy, it's an extremely problematic time for journalism, and we don't know how our country will come out of this crisis, massive crisis. We have, I mean, dozens of thousands of deaths and the economy in very bad shape. So we will face a very serious, devastating crisis, and that's why I want to keep my focus on Julian as well, because I expect that this case will get less and less attention due to this COVID mess. So I expect even less press coverage on this case.
I can't emphasize enough how important your work is for every single human being in the planet. I will keep following your work. I urge everybody to donate to your GoFundMe. I'll leave the URL for your GoFundMe campaign. Would you like to leave our audience with anything else?
Yes, first of all, I'm grateful to you for this conversation and grateful to you for supporting my crowdfunding initiative for the legal fees. I want to tell our people who are listening to this conversation that basically this case is about what kind of society we want. I mean, do we want a society where the people who commit war crimes, the people who commit extraordinary renditions and extrajudicial killings using drones and so on, are free as the air, whereas the people who expose these war crimes and serious human rights violations go to prison? Because this is the kind of society we have so far. We have seen that no CIA agents, no soldier basically ended up in prison for the atrocities linked to the war on terror and other kind of, and the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. Whereas the people who expose it, the journalists like Julian Assange, the sources like Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden, they had to pay a massive price, a price that no criminal ever paid. And this is an upside down world. So, do we want this kind of society, upside down world, where the war criminals are free as the air, and the journalists and journalistic sources go to prison for life, or do we want to change it? I think it's absolutely important we change it. I think it is absolutely important that we have the war criminals in prison and the journalists and the journalistic sources free to expose these war crimes, because this is what information and journalism is supposed to be in a democracy. In a dictatorship, you are not allowed to do so. You are not allowed to expose state criminality. You will be killed. You will be put in prison. In a democracy, it must be possible. And I want a society where it is possible. This is what drives me. If you ask me about your question, I want to fight for a society where the war criminals go to prison and the journalists and the journalistic sources are able to expose their war crimes completely safely without ending up in prison, without having to escape to Russia. I want that they are able to remain in their state and to do it freely and safely without to fight a devil with another devil. I don't want this. So this case is about this. It's not about it's about Julian Assange as a human being, of course, but it is about this. It is about getting the war criminals in prison and getting the journalists and the journalistic sources free and safe.
And also preparing ourselves for the future. I mean, we know that at a time of crisis is a time that the state moves into take away more of our freedoms. I mean, we saw 9/11 and the Patriot Act in the US, where the US government moved into people's pockets and started collecting data on their calls and emails. Now with COVID, we're seeing our location data being explored by test and trace by apps that we carry in our pockets now. Everybody has their location monitored. Also, our health data is going to start, or is already being explored. So obviously your case is very important for the future, because I mean we're definitely going to see, hopefully, whistleblowers coming out with information about what's going on right now.
And that's why they want to crush Julian Assange. They absolutely want to win the case, because they want to send a message. They want to set a precedent, say, look, if you do this kind of things, if you mess up with us, your life will be destroyed. And that's why we want to save him, for the opposite reason. We want to send a message to the people. You can expose these people. You can expose war crimes. You can expose the NSA and mass surveillance, and you can do it safely. And you don't have to pay a price, which is your freedom, your life, or escaping to Russia. You have to be able to do it safely in your own country, because this is what democracy is supposed to do, is supposed to be.
Stefania, thanks so much for your work and your absolute generosity.
Thank you so much for this excellent interview. Thank you.